G'day, I'm Owen. You've joined the pub test, and we are continuing looking at the Mary Kelly crime scene. I thought we'd actually get into the room by the end of this video, but we're not. Because there was an event that happened the day before that on the surface you would say, Owen, what bearing does it have on the Jack the Ripper saga? And I don't want to put too much confirmation bias into this, but you let me know at the end. See if you sort of think I am. But let's get straight down to it. On November the 8th of 1888, Sir Charles Warren, the police commissioner, resigns. And that resignation is accepted, but it doesn't become known until after the Mary Kelly crime scene is discovered. And also it's not known until after all the police and so forth are around 13 Miller's Court. And you might say, well, what bearing does that have at all on the Jack the Ripper saga? Because he wasn't on the street performing these crimes. He was just sitting in an office, probably. Well, let's see. Let's unpack the event that led up to this resignation. And it also has a bearing on what happened outside 13 Miller's Court. So make sure you hang around till we actually get to the crime scene in this video. But I did state that we'd actually get inside and work out what happened in there. But that's the video after next. So I'm now one video behind what I planned. But let's look at Sir Charles Warren and who was he and how does he fit in to the Jack the Ripper saga. Well, he was born in 1840 and he passed away in 1927. So he was 87 years old. And back then, that was quite a good age to live to. Not that many people really did. And considering his life, this is also a little bit surprising as well. So he must have been a fairly fit, active, and mentally active bloke as well. But at the age of 21, after his education, he was commissioned to surveying Gibraltar and also the Rock of Gibraltar. So I think it's safe to say that at a young age, he really showed the aptitude in many different skills. And he built some model to do with this surveying of Gibraltar that is still in a museum today. And then in 1867, he was brought along on an expedition to start doing some archaeological digs under Temple Mount in the Palestine area. Now, I said under the Temple Mount, which apparently is a very significant site over there. He actually found what I would consider a well, but they called it like a water shaft, and even today it's known as Warren Shaft, named after Sir Charles Warren. It is important to state that he was a known Freemason and took that very seriously. That has led in later times people to start suggesting the Freemason conspiracy theory to do with the Jack the Ripper saga, but that's jumping ahead. We haven't even got to that yet, but he did start serving in the military, and he distinguished himself quite well and rose up the ranks as a military leader. But then the event of 1882 happened called the Palmer Expedition. Now, Palmer was sent to basically ensure, I believe, that Egypt wouldn't get involved in the fighting of the Suez Canal. And so he was trying to seek peace with some Bedouins and Egyptians and everything, but he didn't go in with a whole crew of people, just a small group went in, and that apparently, because it was very dangerous around that area, it was quite surprising that he actually succeeded in his mission and accomplished what he was sent to do. But on the way out, he and his party were ambushed, and they weren't seen again, or at least alive. So they sent Colonel Warren to find out what happened to Palmer's expedition, and they do work it out. They find the culprits, have them executed, and what was left of Palmer and his crew were brought back to England. And that gave Sir Charles Warren quite the notoriety. Now, there's very scant detail on, one, how he worked it out and how he found the culprits, but this, without a doubt, was a resounding success and raised up his profile quite massively. But it didn't end there. Around 1884 and 1885, Germany were trying to get more influence into South Africa. Now, there is a connection between Germany and South Africa if you want to do that history lesson, but Germany were trying to get more of a foothold there, and the British Empire said, we don't really want that to happen. So they sent Charles Warren to go sort it out. Now, he did so, and surprisingly, particularly back in those days, he did so without any conflict and managed to shore up support for the British Empire in that area. And so again, for the people higher up, he seemed to be definitely someone to watch. Someone to keep your eye on, because here was someone that could just go and get things done. Well, in 1886, he ran for Parliament, and it said that he had a bit of a radical ideas that he wanted to bring in, and he only just missed out on getting elected by less than 1,000 votes. So we're not talking someone here that was just way off the wall and a total nutter with his ideas. He must have been able to gain support of quite a lot of people. But then, around late 1886, 1887, early 1887, he gets appointed as the police commissioner. That post he held until he resigns on November the 8th, 1888, right during the Jack the Ripper crimes. Well, we're going to pin that and get back to it. But right now you're probably scratching your head saying, but he didn't have anything to do with the police. How did he get that job? Well, we'll look at it. But what happened after he left the police force? Well, it's stated in 1889 he's returned back to the military, and he served over in Singapore. And he was serving in Singapore for a few years. But now we're looking at this. He's now pushing 50, and he's still active in the military. But then the Second Boer War happened in 1899-1900, and he's sent back to that. Probably because of his previous experience. No doubt because he did quite well over there and raised up in the ranks of the military. But in this Second Boer War, it didn't quite go the same as it did in the first one. And I'd suggest now he's close to 60, and I don't think it was age, but sometimes we get stuck in our ways, or we think, hey, these younger people don't know what they're talking about. I've got the experience. I've done this before. You blokes sit back and watch how we do it. But things have changed, and that could have been the reason as to why. It's probably why that second time around things didn't go quite so good, and a particular event called the Siege of Ladysmith. Now, they were meant to be bringing relief to this place that had been under siege and got totally botched, apparently, and a few of the other commanders basically said, he's the biggest nonghead on the face of the earth. It totally got ruined because of him. Well, they bring him back to England, and he never sees active duty again. But not long after that, he retires, and what is absolutely fascinating, these people associated with the Jack the Ripper crimes and their connections with things that we just blows our mind, is that he worked with Baden-Powell setting up the Boy Scout movement in the 1900s. So around 1908. But no doubt you're now saying, thank you very much, Owen, for that history lesson, but what does that have to do with Jack the Ripper? And how on earth did he get the job as the police commissioner? Because only for that 2-year period did he have anything to do with the police, it would seem. Well, this is interesting, and I'm not sure why, but there could have been good reasons for it, but they often appointed a military person to run the police back then, and that was common practice up until about the 1900s, before they probably start realizing that military people and civilians are quite different. Now, I've never been in the military myself, but you hear military people say they have to get used to civilian life. But how did Charles Warren get this job in the very first instance? Well, it is possible that they thought because he could unravel that Palmer expedition and work out what happened there, that he would make quite the good leader of investigators. But I actually think it was more to do with the fact that the previous bloke who had resigned had sort of dropped the ball a bit, according to most reports. That he was just sitting in his office, not doing a great deal, and the police force had declined, and so they wanted someone to bring in a bit more order and a bit more discipline. And Sir Charles Warren definitely did that, to the annoyance of the police people on the beat. He wanted their shoes shined. He wanted to bring a bit of military precision to what they were doing. But there were other issues going on. Now remember, he ran for political office, and his leaning was towards the Liberals, but Henry Matthews, who was Home Secretary, was more conservative. And those two butted heads right from the get-go. So we got these political issues going on inside these departments. And Matthews wanted the Assistant Commissioner James Munro to be independent. And Warren was actually clashing with many others within the department. And the press, well, they piled on very quickly. Being military, Warren would dress very, very sharply in the full uniform. And that just got absolutely slammed by the media, basically saying, look at this nonghead prancing around, and yet look at the problems that are on the street. You've got the Trafalgar Square incident. You've got this Jack the Ripper running around, and this bloke only worries about if his buttons are shined. But what's interesting is that Charles Warren decided to appoint 5 superintendents to help run different divisions and bring that organisation to the police force. The Assistant Commissioner, now we say assistant, it wasn't exactly Warren's deputy, but his name was Munro, and those two had been clashing all the way through. Well, he said, I want a bloke to head up the Criminal Investigation Division, the CID, and I know the exact bloke that we need. Melville McNaughton. And yes, he's been mentioned quite a lot in this series, by the way. And so Charles Warren says, no, not having that bloke. And he came up with some reason saying that he probably just wasn't up for the job. But that caused even more friction between Warren and Munro, to the point that they both tendered their resignation. Now we see that today. That is not so weird. If two people cannot work with each other anymore, they both say, well, let's just throw a hat in the ring and see which one they want to keep. And they let Munro go and kept Sir Charles Warren, which would be a win for him. Or so you would think, but it wasn't exactly they just let Munro go, as I just stated. They more moved him aside to a different department and then got some of these superintendents to directly report to him and not Sir Charles Warren. So what was going on there? Well, I would suggest, and what we're going to discuss next, we'll probably back this up, I believe, but you let me know down in comments, is they thought, well, we don't want to lose Munro, but we have to make sure that there's no way for Charles Warren to come back when he does leave. We have to make 100% certain that people know he wasn't fit for this job. So we will let him go about his business until he falls flat on his face. You might be saying to yourself, surely not. Not with such an important role, particularly with all the things that were going on with the Jack the Ripper stuff. You'd want the best person in that job. So why did they not let Warren go if they had no plan of keeping him long term? Well, it happens today. In private sector, public sector, you send someone out onto the pier, wait for them to fall off, and then there's no coming back for them. And I think that's exactly what happened, as we are going to see. Because the press were absolutely slamming Charles Warren now and making him look like a total bungling idiot. And it's all to do with what was happening outside 13 Miller's Court after we've had Indian Harry and McCarthy bring the police back. Now all the police are now standing outside that room. Inspector Abilene himself is there with some other heavy hitters, all standing around waiting to get into the room. And they're not looking for a key. We will get onto the key in the next video, but they're not asking for a key. They're not wanting a key. They're just not wanting anyone to go into the room at all. Me thinking, but surely the crimes happened. They can look through the window. Why were they not knocking the door down the moment they got there. Well, that's because they were under instruction, or so they thought at the time, not knowing that Charles Warren had now tendered his resignation the day before. But the instruction was, when the next crime happens, you wait until we get the bloodhounds in, because they will track down Jack the Ripper. Yet, no, you did hear that correct. They were going to get bloodhounds in the City of London to track someone. And did not the press have a field day with that? But we actually need to look at the history of this, because the reality is very different to even what people still believe today. So a suggestion was made during these crimes going on in Whitechapel that maybe they could get bloodhounds in to track the perpetrator. And there were two dogs in particular that they were going to use. I think it's Burgo and Barnaby. But the bloke that trained them up, he said, well, look, it might work. He wasn't like selling this idea, but he said, well, if you're going to, though, use my dogs, I want a little bit of money to compensate as well. But Warren, he wasn't sold on the idea at all. He said, no, that just is not going to work. He goes, are you guys mad? But everyone in the press made it sound like it was his idea in the first place. But, you know, he was open-minded. So he said, well, let's give this a go. So I'll put it to the test. And so then he decides to run off, hide, and then they let the dogs out. Literally. And these dogs found him. And he thought, well, that's actually not too bad. So he did it again. And again, these dogs found him. So he went, well, okay. There is a chance here that this might actually work. And you know what we're doing at the moment hasn't worked. So why not give something else a go? So when the next crime happens, we'll wait to bring in Burgo and Barnaby and they can go off and see if they can't find this perpetrator. But the press got hold of this and they changed this story massively. One, they depicted Sir Charles Warren running away from these dogs like a fleeing criminal, which wasn't the situation at all. And then they stated that the dogs escaped while they were chasing Charles Warren. And they had the headlines, who's going to track the trackers? We've got these two tracking dogs now roaming the streets of London. And that just wasn't true either. It never ever happened. And yet that is still believed by some today that these hounds were out terrorising the streets of London. And that there's still packs of them out there from these two, Burgo and Barnaby. Not true at all. And this attack on Sir Charles Warren was absolutely relentless in the press. And so on November the 8th, he tenders his resignation for the second time. Except this time, it was accepted. Did the police standing outside 13 Miller's Court on November the 9th know that Sir Charles Warren was no longer in that job? Well, they waited around for quite some time. We're not talking 10 minutes here. They're all hanging around for almost a couple of hours. And then word gets down to say, the dogs aren't turning up. Then they try and get inside that room. But what is interesting here, and I find this just fascinating, is that in the press then it was made almost like this crime, the Mary Kelly crime scene, was the catalyst for Sir Charles Warren to lose his job effectively and fall on his sword by resigning. But he'd resigned before, and then the failure of the dogs not even turning up was made to look like a total bungle on his part. But even the person who trained these dogs said, look, that would have been a total waste of time sending him in to Miller's Court at that time of the day. He said, look, the chances of him finding them in the City of London, the perpetrator, would have been very remote. But there was a chance if they had have got there around 5 a.m. before the streets got flooded and all the scents were taken away. He said, so I wouldn't have sent the dogs in if it was my call. But as stated, it was made to look like Sir Charles Warren had totally dropped the ball on this. And so they then appoint someone to the Crime Investigation Division very shortly after Sir Charles Warren is gone. And who was that? Sir Melville Macnaghten, the bloke that Charles Warren did not want is now leading the investigation, and all of a sudden, things changed. Melville McNaughton knew a lot about Jack the Ripper, so he claims in internal messages and even publicly, the police were now shutting down this investigation from the higher up levels. They're saying we've worked this out, though they never released a name, and the press started dropping it. So after taking a step back and looking at all of this, I do believe that there was a systematic attack on Sir Charles Warren's character, rightly or wrongly. You can make that call for yourself, but they wanted him out of that job. And so no doubt people higher up were feeding the press information. And as soon as they got that result, well then that information stopped. There were no sensational stories about the higher up people in the press, but Melville McNaughton certainly worked with the press a lot better. And so he does not cop the same type of treatment that Sir Charles Warren did on any stretch, and neither did any of the other police after this event. But I'm not saying that there was a conspiracy by anyone in the police force to commit the crime in Miller's Court, but they certainly used it to perfect advantage to achieve the result they wanted by even waiting until this event became well known before releasing the announcement that Sir Charles Warren had resigned. Because then there was no coming back for him. Even if this other bloke higher up had have lost his job and someone who supported Sir Charles Warren came in, the public would not have accepted him back into that police force. But now, knowing that Warren's out, the dogs aren't turning up, you got people ready to get inside that room at 13 Miller's Court. And we'll be talking about that in the next video. But what did you think of this one? Now, I know it wasn't directly related to the actual crimes themselves, but it's fascinating to see the political maneuverings happening inside the police force during this very pivotal time. And it is no wonder then why the investigation seemed to be totally botched. Because it would appear strongly that the police department were not working well together. In fact, there was an element there trying to make people look stupid. And they succeeded in doing so. But let me know what you think about this one in comments. I think it does paint the picture of the power of the press. And also, it still happens today that you can't believe every single thing you read in the media, because some of those reports will be a little bit sensationalized. But thank you very much for watching. It genuinely is appreciated. Do the usuals, like and subscribe. I'm Owen, you've been watching The Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.